I've never seen that in my life. I've seen decomposed bodies of someone that drowns. You find the body a week later. That's one thing, and they're decomposed. Lacy did not decompose. She rotted in her own body, in that hole, in that sewer, in the couch.
January 3rd, 2022, Slaughter, Louisiana, a small town about 30 minutes outside of Baton Rouge, a quiet neighborhood on Tom Drive, a house that from the outside looked like every other house on the block. Well kept, ordinary, the kind of home where nothing alarming ever appeared to happen. At 2:30 in the morning, a 911 call came in. Sheila Fletcher, 66 years old, told the operator she had found her daughter unresponsive on the couch. Emergency services arrived. The coroner was called, and when the first responders walked into that living room, they encountered something none of them had ever seen before, and something none of them would ever forget. The coroner who examined Lacy Fletcher said it plainly, years later. "I've seen every kind of death there is. I've never seen a homicide like this. I have never seen a human being literally tortured and allowed to die while she is alive. Lacy did not decompose. She rotted in her own body, in that hole, in that sewer, in the couch." Lacy Ellen Fletcher was born November 25th, 1985. She was diagnosed with autism as a child. She struggled with severe social anxiety and a below-average IQ. Her parents, Sheila and Clay Fletcher, pulled her out of school when she was 16. After that, she was rarely seen in public again. The last time anyone outside the family saw Lacy was when she was 21 years old, gently lifting weights in the street outside her home. That was the last glimpse anyone had of her. After that, the door closed, and it didn't open again for 15 years. When Lacy was 24, her cognitive health began to decline sharply. She became increasingly unable to leave the house. At some point, she stopped leaving the couch altogether, and instead of getting her help, instead of calling a doctor, a hospital, a social worker, anyone, Sheila and Clay Fletcher let her stay there. They brought her food and water. They placed towels beside her so she could use them as a toilet. Eventually, she could no longer reach the towels. She began relieving herself directly onto the couch. The cushion absorbed it. The frame absorbed it. The floor beneath the sofa began to buckle from the pooling waste. A human-sized hole was worn through the upholstery where Lacy sat and slowly disappeared into. Sources close to the investigation said Lacy had melted into the couch.
Are we doing confessions or on the couch? If we can get a phone, then we can do confessions on the couch then. Are we doing confessions now?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna need you to count around with me, okay? So I'm gonna instruct you, okay?
In 2010, 12 years before her death, Sheila and Clay Fletcher had visited a psychologist named Dr. Donald Hopp. They went without Lacy. They told him she was refusing to leave the living room, that she was urinating and defecating on a towel on the floor. Hoppe urged them to consider hospitalization immediately. He described her behavior as acutely psychotic and said she needed professional intervention. There is no record that they ever sought help after that visit. The rest of the house was clean, neat, well-maintained. Sheila Fletcher served as a town alderman. Clay worked at the nearby nuclear power plant. They were college sweethearts, respected active members of their church. Neighbors said they had no idea the Fletchers even had a daughter.
And which is what I keep thinking, like, what about neighbors? Did anybody ever just knock? Like, what about that? What are the neighbors even saying about this?
Yeah, it's really interesting speaking to the neighbors because the very first neighbor I spoke to actually was good friends with Sheila and Clay. In fact, they didn't want to answer my questions because they believe that Sheila and Clay are just not getting a fair shake, which was all the more reason for me to push back and say, hey, look, that's why I'm here. We want to make sure we get both sides of the stories. If you support these two parents, these people that are accused and now have pleaded no contest to manslaughter, then we want to hear it. We want to hear about them. But really, they didn't have any interest to speak to me other than to say that they support their friends across the street. Now, a different neighbor down the street, about 2 or 3 doors down, had a completely different story. She tells me that she's been living in that neighborhood for 12 years, and she literally had no idea that their daughter was actually living there. On top of that, it's all about this horrific thing that happened right down the block. Here's a portion of our conversation together.
I can tell you that we didn't know that they had a daughter until this happened.
Okay.
And my husband works shift work, and he saw everything at 3 o'clock in the morning.
And how long have you been a neighbor? So, like, you didn't
I've
even...
lived here 12 years.
So you've lived here 12 years, and this entire time you didn't even know there was a girl, a daughter that was living inside that home?
No. Between, like, the sheriff's department and the slaughter cops and the coroner and the EMS and the fire department, there was a lot of them.
When emergency services found Lacy on January 3rd, 2022, she weighed 96 pounds. She was 36 years old. Her body was emaciated. Her skin had deteriorated down to the bone in places. Open wounds covered her backside and her legs. Bed sores that had gone untreated for so long they had become infected to the bone. Maggots were eating at her extremities. She was covered in feces. Feces was found shoved into her face, chest, and abdomen. Feces and couch cushioning were found under her fingernails and in her stomach contents, meaning Lacy, in her final days, had attempted to eat her own surroundings to survive.
Who fought hard to get the Fletchers put behind bars since the day he processed that crime scene. Dr. Ewell Bickham was the coroner who performed Lacy's autopsy. He is here with me live now. Dr. Bickham, I am so sorry that you have had to endure this. Even in your line of work, I can't imagine there has been anything in your career like this. Take me to the moment that you first walked in on that scene.
Well, I walked in on the scene after Officer Dalton Corbin called me from Slaughter PD as I was dispatched. I was arrived within 10 minutes. I arrived before Kate and the ambulance there. When I got there, the officers, the first responders on scene were just in a daze. They were just standing there. They were on the outside. When I walked in, the house smelled of a stench of, it smelled like a sewer, a septic tank, and also a smell of death. I've never smelled that in my life. I've dealt with decomposed bodies. I've dealt with all sorts of death, degradation, whatever. Never experienced this in all of my career.
And what did you witness Clay and Sheila doing as first responders, and you were there witnessing this horror?
When I walked through the door, to the right of me in the kitchen, Clay and Sheila Fletcher were standing there. Clay was standing there emotionless. The mom had her head between her knees. I saw a tear or two. To the left was the living room where Lacy was. I immediately went through there. I didn't stop and socialize with the parents. I went in there to where Lacy was. And
I know this has got to be hard for you, even as a coroner, and even given what you have witnessed in your entire career. I read that you
it was tough.
struggled processing this. You struggled for a week afterwards. You cried for a week. You couldn't eat for a week. Is that true?
That's true. It still bothers me today. And like I said, I've seen every kind of death there is. I've seen elderly people die of natural causes. I've seen suicides, homicides. I've seen everything there is. I've never seen a homicide like this. I have never seen an individual, a human being, literally tortured and allowed to die while she is alive. I've never seen that in my life. I've seen decomposed bodies of someone that drowns. You find the body a week later. That's one thing, and they're decomposed. Lacy did not decompose. She rotted in her own body, in that hole, in that sewer, in the couch.
Sheila Fletcher had told the 911 operator she had just found Lacy on the couch, but the medical examiner determined Lacy had been dead for 1 to 2 days before that call was made. She had likely died on New Year's Eve or New Year's Day. Sheila and Clay had been on a holiday getaway. They came home, found their daughter dead on the couch, and waited. In May 2022, Both were arrested and charged with second-degree murder. They were released on bond. A judge dismissed the charges over a technicality in the language of the indictment. A grand jury re-indicted them in June 2023. The case wound through the courts for 2 more years. In February 2024, Sheila and Clay Fletcher pleaded no contest to the reduced charge of manslaughter. They did not admit guilt. Their defense attorney said Lacy had been capable of making her own decisions, that she had refused care, that her parents had loved her and never intended to hurt her. The couch was her sanctuary, Clay Fletcher said at the sentencing hearing. It was her comfort zone. On March 20th, 2024, a judge sentenced both Sheila and Clay Fletcher to 40 years each, with 20 years suspended. They will each serve a minimum of 20 years. Given their age, both were 68 at sentencing. It is likely they will die in prison. The sentencing judge left nothing unsaid. The truth is that Lacy laid on a couch and slowly died because she got no medical or mental health care. Lacy Fletcher was 36 years old. She had been diagnosed with autism as a child. She had been pulled from school at 16. She had been left on a couch for over a decade while the house around her stayed clean, while her parents went to church, while neighbors knocked on the door and never knew she was sitting right there behind it. She tried to eat the couch to survive. She had her whole life ahead of her. She trusted the people around her, and she spent the last 12 years of it rotting alive in her parents' living room. Rest in peace. Thank you for watching The Grim Watch. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime documentaries. See you in the next video.